Beyond the gate's spoilers tease that tucked away in a nondescript envelope sealed with crimson wax, the message arrived at Anita's gilded doorstep on a rain-slick afternoon. Its contents destined to shatter the fragile equilibrium she had painstakingly rebuilt since the fallout of that long-ago scandal. The envelope bore no return address, only an elegant emblem embossed in gold leaf stylized eye peering through a cracked gate, the insignia of Articulates, a clandestine collective of artists whose careers had been derailed by the same controversy that had once embarrassed Anita on live television. She had thought herself above retribution, having offered remorse and then retreat, retiring from the spotlight to cultivate a quieter life of reflection and charity work. Yet now, like a phantom, the past had come for her once more. The letter inside crackled ominously as she unfolded it, the stationery heavy and textured, as though meant to convey gravity. "Dearest Anita," it began, in flowing script that blended courtesy with menace. "We write not to judge you, but to remind you that Artar's sacred kami remembers your betrayal." Even those opening lines struck at the core of her being. Betrayal. She remembered the moment she admitted, on live stage, that a promotional campaign for a philanthropic event had been orchestrated in a way that misrepresented the suffering of a handful of struggling artists, including members of the very community she claimed to support. It was a fabrication meant to tug at donor heartstrings, yet it had backfired spectacularly, revealing her eagerness to manipulate tragedy for fame. The backlash had been swift and brutal, denunciations in the press, scathing op-eds, whispers among gallery owners that her name could no longer grace a lineup without igniting protests. Anita's pulse quickened as she read on. "You will choose at once, issue the apology you once withheld, ascending the stage you abandoned, to atone publicly, or keep your silence, and watch as we unveil the materials we have amassed, emails, recordings, personal account that will eclipse your career completely. We are not cruel, but we are relentless." The ultimatum pulsed at her senses like a second heart, and for a moment she stood frozen, the letter fluttering in her trembling hand. Outside, the sky wept its own elegy, raindrops pattering against the windowpane as if mocking her turmoil. She recalled the genesis of the scandal, a gala benefit billed as an unprecedented celebration of underrepresented voices in the arts, where she had promised to donate the proceeds to grassroots theater collectives across the city. Donors had arrived in droves, lured by Anita's star power and the promise of nurturing genuine talent. Instead, behind closed doors, she had funneled a significant portion of funds into a lavish production of her own designa vanity project of such extravagance that it eclipsed the narratives of the very artists she had claimed to uplift. It was the betrayal that cut deepest, the exploitation of dreams, the commodification of pain. She had apologized once, but only in a muted press release, couched in corporate jargon and careful omissions, a gesture that rang hollow to those who had seen their chance at recognition evaporate. Now, more than 2 years later, the phantom voices of that hushed collective rose again to demand restitution, not in money but in art itself, a confession on stage, stripped of artifice, where she would stand bare before an audience primed to either forgive or crucify her anew. She paced the length of her drawing room, its elegant furnishings a stark contrast to her agitation. Her reflection in the gilded mirror looked back at her, eyes clouded with regret and defiance in equal measure. Could she risk the stage again, exposing herself to the jeers of those who loathed her? Or would her silence unleash the Articulate's wrath, as promised? As the afternoon waned, Anita resolved to seek counsel from her closest confidant, Emilia Rousseau, a celebrated sculptor who had once counted herself among those Anita had wronged. Emilia's studio, a cathedral of stone and clay, stood at the edge of the art district, its walls lined with half-formed visages and torsos caught in the rapture of creation. When Anita arrived, breathless with news of the letter, Emilia looked up from a marble bust she was carving, her chisel paused mid-stroke. Beneath the dust and determination in her eyes, Anita saw something she had not expected, empathy edged with skepticism. "They want you to apologize on stage," Amelia said quietly, setting aside her tools. "Art is their weapon, and you once their comrade must wade back into the arena, bleeding in the open." Amelia's voice held a tremor of caution. "But you have changed, Anita. You've done good work in the orphanage, with the medical fund. Perhaps they'll accept that as atonement." Anita shook her head. The letter had made clear that superficial charity would not suffice. They demanded the spotlight, the theater itself, as the platform for her contrition. Together, they unpacked the possible outcomes. An apology on an intimate stage, perhaps an experimental performance piece that blurred the lines between monologue and confessional art, could humanize Anita before the audience. Yet it carried the risk of humiliation, of people rising in protest mid-speech, papering over her words with shouts of condemnation. On the other hand, refusing to meet their demand might embolden the articulates to publish every shred of evidence they held, ensuring her return to public view would be under the harshest glare of scandal. Amelia cautioned that no one truly vanishes once their name has been dragged through the mud. They only recede into whispers until some echo calls them back. That night, Anita lay awake haunted by the rustle of the letter's parchment. Flashes of her past triumphs flickered through her mind, the thunderous applause at her final performance, the rush of adrenaline as she stepped into the limelight, the heady sense of being adored. She remembered how the taste of victory had turned sour when reporters uncovered the diverted donations, how swiftly the stage had turned beneath her feet. Could she summon the courage to face an audience that might greet her not with admiration but contempt? Or would she stand, voice quavering, shoulder trembling, and beg for forgiveness in a city that had already condemned her? In the days that followed, Anita retreated into preparation. She assembled notes, drafting her words meticulously, striving to balance honesty with the poise her public persona demanded. She imagined the stage as a threshold her own personal gate beyond, which lay either redemption or further ruin. Each morning she practiced her confession before a mirror, uttering the words to the empty room, "I stand before you to own my misdeeds, to honor those I have hurt, and to accept the consequences of my actions." But the words tasted bitter on her tongue, lacking the raw emotion the articulates craved. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with rumors of her impending comeback. Social media lit up with speculation. Would she truly apologize live? Would she attempt to reclaim her former glory with a grand performance? The trolls and cynics mocked her, while some loyal fans held their breath in hope. Local news outlets sent cameras to her neighborhood, waiting for a glimpse of her arrival at any public venue. Anita felt exposed in her own home, each passing car headlight slicing through her curtains like a spotlight she could not escape. Her only sanctuary lay beyond the gates of her estate, in a small, overgrown courtyard where she had once composed poetry in solitude. There, beneath the ancient oak, she found a measure of peace, penning drafts of her confession on parchment torn from an artist's sketchbook. Each line was a step across a chasm of shame, a bridge made of words leading her back to the site of her greatest failure. She envisioned how her apology might unfold, the hush of the lights dimming, a single spotlight illuminating her figure as she approached the microphone, the hush of the audience leaning forward. She would not ask for accolades, only forgiveness, and perhaps, in that moment of vulnerability, the power of her own voice might transform her penance into art. As she wrote, a flicker of defiance took root alongside her remorse. She realized that the articulates had something vital. Their weapon was not just the threat of exposure, but the conviction that art could serve as both blade and salve. If she chose to confront them on their terrain, she could reclaim the narrative, turning her apology into a performance that transcended regret, one that illuminated the complexities of guilt and forgiveness. She could weave her misdeeds into a tapestry of confession so compelling that the audience would not simply pardon her, but understand the frailty of ambition itself. Yet doubts persisted. What if her words, no matter how artful, failed to pierce the collective armor of resentment? What if her polished delivery rang hollow against the raw testimonies the articulates planned to unleash? She needed a strategy beyond eloquence, a gesture that proved her sincerity. Amelia suggested assembling a collaborative exhibition, inviting the very artists whom she had harmed to co-create a multimedia installation. Anita envisioned glass panels etched with her apology, juxtaposed with sculptures and paintings that told the stories of loss and recovery. Together, they could craft an immersive journey through betrayal and reconciliation. But would the articulates accept such an olive branch, or would it be seen as another ploy to manipulate their sympathies? In the time before the scheduled performancian underground space, known only to the city's avant-garde, Anita began reaching out to individual members of the collective. She sent private letters to those she had wronged most grievously, a playwright whose production funding she had redirected, a dancer whose choreography she undermined, a photographer whose access to resources she had curtailed. In each missive, she offered not just apology but restitution, funding for their next project, promotion through her network, and most importantly, a pledge to stand behind their voices from that day forward. Some responded with cautious curiosity, others dismissed her attempts as too little, too late. But a handful agreed to meet, sitting across from her in dim cafes scattered around the city, their eyes guarded but open. In one such meeting, a painter named Delacroix, no relation to the French master, but a name she would never forget, barely 30, with piercing gray eyes and hands stained with cadmium red, confronted her. "You offered us a stage, then stole it," Delacroix said, voice low but unwavering. "Your apology means nothing if it doesn't come with action. You want our voices? Then show up at our gallery opening next week, unannounced, and deliver your apology before my work, before all our works. Then step aside and let us speak." His challenge was a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Anita accepted. She would stand before their art, not in her theater, but at the very heart of their reclaimed domain. The gallery was a long-abandoned warehouse transformed by flickering LEDs and steel beams bent into arches. It was here, among the echoing footsteps of skeptics and supporters alike, that she would speak. She would risk humiliation not only before anonymous patrons, but before the faces of those she had betrayed. And yet, in that gamble lay the possibility of genuine redemption, of an apology unvarnished by self-interest, of a return to the true spirit of art as communal truth-telling. Night after night, she rehearsed her speech. She sketched diagrams of the gallery layout, planning her entrance through a side corridor to avoid the pretense of ceremony. The articulates had promised to broadcast her apology via live stream to anyone unable to attend, ensuring that her confession would reach a wider audience than the initial reveal threatened by their dossier. She felt the weight of expectation pressing upon her, both from the collective and from her own conscience. She understood that this performance was no longer about image rehabilitation. It was about confronting the consequences of ambition run amok and demonstrating that empathy, once lost, could be regained through genuine collaboration. As the night of the gallery opening approached, the city seemed to hold its breath. Street corners buzzed with questions. Would Anita crumble under the pressure, or would she deliver the apology that had eluded her 2 years ago? Would the articulates grant her forgiveness, or would they expose every hidden corner of her compromised past? In the cool dusk air, flyers bearing the cracked gate emblem appeared on lampposts, a reminder of the reckoning to come. Despite the tension, Anita felt an unexpected surge of clarity. This was her moment to seize the narrative, to embrace the very art form she had once exploited for vanity, and to transform her penance into a collaborative act of creation. Under the dim glow of the warehouse's industrial lights, guests began to gather. Patrons, critics, former colleagues, and students mingled near installations crafted by the articulates, sculptures of shattered mirrors, paintings streaked with tears, and video projections of truncated rehearsals. Each piece spoke of the collective's pain and resilience, a tapestry of voices that had been silenced, then rediscovered. In the center hall, a pedestal held the crumpled remnants of Anita's first press release, plastered behind glass, as a cautionary relic of insincerity. Anita approached, heart-pounding, clutching a single sheet of paper, her new speech, unembellished by rhetoric, drafted in her own trembling hand. She knew that the audience's eyes would burn with judgment the moment she stepped into view. Yet she also sensed that the raw honesty of this setting, among works created in her absence, might transform her confession into a collective exorcism of guilt and renewal. With a final breath, she straightened her shoulders and stepped beyond the gates of her own making, into the arena of truth where art itself would be her judge and perhaps her salvation. As the hush settled over the gallery's rough-hewn beams and concrete floor, Anita felt the electricity of possibility crackle through the gathered crowd. The articulates watched from the perimeter, their faces a mosaic of curiosity, skepticism, and something like hope. She had delivered her apology not as a rehearsed performance, but as an earnest confession, voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as she laid bare the motivations that had led her to misuse art for personal gain. She thanked them for granting her this final stage, then stepped aside without fanfare, allowing the collective's own works to speak for themselves. For a moment, silence reigned, an uneasy pause pregnant with anticipation before one solitary clap rang out, followed by hesitant applause that swelled into something resembling approval. Anita exhaled, feeling the weight of 2 years of regret lift slightly, replaced by the fragile buoyancy of second chances. Afterward, the articulates extended an invitation to Anita that surprised her, to join them in shaping an exhibition that would tour the city's lesser-known neighborhoods, bringing art into abandoned warehouses, community centers, and open-air spaces. This offer was neither magnanimous nor condescending. It was pragmatic, born of the collective's belief that art must live beyond elite galleries and that those who have faltered could still contribute meaningfully to the creative ecosystem. Anita accepted, recognizing that true restitution required sustained engagement, not a one-off apology. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into collaboration, attending the collective's spirited planning sessions, where ideas spilled forth like paint on canvas murals that responded to systemic inequality. Performance pieces that fused dance and spoken word, installations built from found objects salvaged from city dumps. Working shoulder to shoulder with the artists, Anita learned to listen again, to their grievances, their dreams, the scars etched into their ideas by the memory of betrayal. At first, she worried that her presence would cast a pall over brainstorming sessions, that every suggestion would be whispered about behind her back. Yet as she lingered, contributing logistical expertise and resources she had once hoarded for her own gratification, she realized that trust was a muscle that strengthened with exercise. When she proposed sponsoring a pop-up theater event in a disused train station, the artists didn't recoil. They sharpened the concept, weaving in community workshops and apprenticeships for at-risk youth. When she offered to underwrite a late-night projection of street art documentaries, they insisted the funds instead be allocated toward purchasing materials for emerging graffiti artists. Anita adapted, shedding layers of ego she hadn't known she carried. As the exhibition's opening date approached, murmurs of excitement rippled through the city's alternative art circles. Journalists who had once dismissed Anita's career as irredeemable now filed feature stories on the collective's audacious plan to democratize art. Critics predicted that the exhibition would either ignite a renaissance of public creativity or collapse under the weight of its own ambition. Throughout it all, Anita remained acutely aware that any misstep could reignite the scandal that still smoldered in the public imagination. On the eve of the opening, she wandered through the warehouses, watching as murals were affixed to crumbling walls, as technicians rigged projectors and sound systems for late-night performances. The scent of fresh paint and sawdust clung to the air, mingling with the distant hum of traffic. Here, in the belly of reclaimed spaces, she found a quiet thrill, the promise that art, born from collaboration and shared vulnerability, could transcend the insularity of fame and reputation. The first night of the pop-up theater event unfolded under cords of strung lights and underpasses humming with the echo of passing freight trains. Small clusters of spectators perched on folding chairs or leaned against graffiti-covered pillars, drinking in pieces that confronted themes of displacement and resilience. Anita circulated among them, fielding questions with candor, acknowledging her past misdeeds while championing the work on display. At one point, an audience member, her voice unsteady, approached the makeshift stage after a searing monologue about urban gentrification. "Your apology made me cry," she whispered, "and your actions here give me hope." Anita felt tears sting her eyes, not of guilt, but of a dawning recognition that her resolve to change had the power to inspire others. The collective watched quietly from the wings, their initial wariness softened by the sincerity of both applause and critique. In subsequent weeks, the touring exhibition morphed and expanded. In a neighborhood ravaged by recent economic downturn, the artists transformed an empty storefront into a living mural, painting stories of local vendors who'd weathered adversity for decades. In a riverside park slated for redevelopment, they staged a dance piece atop shipping containers, each movement symbolizing the tension between progress and preservation. Anita coordinated press outreach, community partnerships, and funding streams, but she also rolled up her sleeves to stenciling walls and hauling crates of canvases. The act of physical labor once beneath her imagined station as a celebrity musician became a source of unexpected humility and joy. Yet not all chapters of this redemption arc unfolded without friction. Some members of the collective bristled when they sensed Anita's instincts for organization edging toward control. At a planning meeting for a video installation in a historic train depot, she suggested a schedule for rehearsals and tech checks. Two of the younger artists shot her tempered looks, whispering that art could not be scripted like a corporate event. Recognizing the tension, Anita stepped back, allowing the artists to devise their own unstructured approach to experimentation. She reminded herself that restitution required patience, a willingness to cede authority and embrace the chaos that birthed true creativity. Midway through the tour, a leak of internal emails surfaced, online correspondence between Anita and a gallery owner from her scandal days, discussing promotional tactics that had once sparked outrage. For a heartbeat, Anita feared catastrophe. The collective's trust fractured, the media pounced, and the entire project collapsed. But the articulates responded differently than she had anticipated. Rather than condemn her, they convened an emergency gathering and invited her to sit at the center of the circle. There, under the rough glare of bare bulbs, they confronted the leak head-on. A spokesperson read aloud the most damning lines, then paused, looking directly at Anita. "We choose to believe that you have changed," she said, voice resonant with both sorrow and resolve. "But belief alone is not enough. We demand transparency." Anita nodded, her throat tight. She offered to release all her communications from the initial exhibition planning to public record, opening her inbox to scrutiny. This radical gesture of accountability, they agreed, would be the final step toward collective ownership of the project. Within days, the emails were published on an open-source platform, accompanied by annotations from the collective explaining the context of each decision. When the news cycle shifted from scandal to genuine collaboration, the project gained an even wider audience. Universities invited the articulates and Anita to speak about restorative justice through art. City councils requested replicable models for community engagement. Critics began to regard the exhibition not merely as an emergency act of contrition, but as a pioneering experiment in participatory art curation. Yet throughout this momentum, Anita remained vigilant. She knew that redemption was not a destination, but a continuous processive vow renewed with each new challenge. Looking ahead, it seems inevitable that the collective will evolve into a more formal organization, one that mentors emerging artists, offers residual funding for grassroots projects, and documents best practices for cities worldwide. Anita, having transformed her own path from fame-driven exploitation to collaborative stewardship, will likely assume the role of facilitator rather than figurehead, a connector of resources, a champion for unheard voices, and an example of how privilege can be redirected toward communal uplift. But the true power of this movement may lie in its unpredictability. The next generation of artists inspired by the Articulate's model could spin off entirely new collectives, tackling issues as varied as environmental justice, digital privacy, or the ethics of artificial intelligence in creative work. There will undoubtedly be setbacks. Some communities may resist art as a tool for social change, dismissing it as elitist or superficial. Funding streams could dry up, and the collective might fracture under differing visions of what restorative art truly entails. And Anita, ever aware of her own vulnerabilities, will face moments when the temptation to revert to old habits seeking control, craving recognition reemerges. In those moments, the mechanisms she and the Articulates built, open forums for critique, rotating leadership structures, public accountability platforms, will be tested. Her capacity for genuine humility and the collective's commitment to integrity will determine whether the initial spark of this collaboration becomes a lasting flame or flickers out under the weight of internal discord and external cynicism. Beyond the practical logistics, the most profound legacy of this chapter may be the shift in how both artists and audiences conceive of art's role in society. No longer a commodity exchanged among elites, art here becomes a living dialogue, a means of exploring pain, forging empathy, and catalyzing civic engagement. Anita's journey from celebrated performer to contrite collaborator embodies that transformation. She has learned, painfully but irrevocably, that art divorced from accountability is hollow and that atonement demands sustained humility. The Articulates, once a shadowy force of retribution, have revealed themselves as architects of renewal, wielding creative expression not for vengeance, but for justice. If the future follows the trajectory set in motion by this exhibition, we may see a proliferation of similar alliances in cities around the world. Collectives of marginalized voices partnering with those who have stumbled to forge new pathways of artistic expression rooted in mutual respect. The model suggests that the wounds inflicted by scandal need not fester into permanent divisions. When handled with honesty and co-creation, they can give rise to collaborative forms of art that challenge and enrich the social fabric. And though Anita will always carry the memory of her misdeeds, her willingness to step into the collective's crucible has transformed that burden into a catalyst for positive change. As the lights dim on the final installation, an immersive soundscape, recorded from the tour's various sites, echoing with laughter, anger, and the cadence of street noise, Anita stands once more among the Articulates. The crowd has dispersed, leaving only a handful of artists and city officials who helped nurture the project. In the lingering hush, someone flips the switch to the projection screen, revealing a montage of photographs of abandoned buildings reborn as canvases, of faces illuminated by improvised stages, of Anita herself, paint-splattered and smiling genuinely for the first time in years. Against that backdrop, she raises her hand in a subtle salutia gesture of gratitude, of solidarity, of hope. The journey is far from over, but here, in this reclaimed space of light and shadow, past and future converge into a testament of art's boundless capacity to heal, to bridge divides, and to forge unexpected alliances across the gates of mistrust.